Hi, this is Zach Hess. This is my Metaphysics Midterm video, and I would like to apologize for any sloppiness or trailing off that I have. I am still feeling very sick, and as such, I am not thinking the clearest, but I will be doing my best to represent the ideas that I am talking about in this video. Thanks. Okay, so Western individual metaphysics. So that is the belief or the holding that there are many things. Most people seem to hold this without putting much thought into it. Basically, almost everything you see is a thing, as long as it isn't a mere collection of things. A stuff such as water in general. You can't say, look at that water. You'd say something like, look at that body of water, which would be a thing, but water itself is just a stuff. A thing is also not a mere modification of something else. So a wrinkle in the rug is a common example used in the textbook. And a thing also can't be a universal, such as a book in general. So our textbook, Metaphysics by Peter Van Inwagen, is not a thing. But if you say, this textbook right here, this book, not the ideas within it, but the book, that is a thing. It's not a universal. And also, an event can't be a thing. So, last Tuesday isn't a thing. It did happen, but it isn't a thing in Western individual metaphysics. So, what are the main arguments for Western individual metaphysics? So, the two other options we discussed in class were monism and nihilism. So monism holds that everything as we see it is actually one thing, and it's just represented through many modifications. So I'm a modification of the one. My chair is a modification of the one, and they aren't necessarily separate things, but you can still talk about them separately, even though they are, in fact, part of one thing. There aren't very many metaphysical issues with monism, but there are some severe implications that come along with it. One issue is ethics. It seems like if the one is having moral issues with itself, that doesn't really seem to make sense because it's acting on itself. There aren't individuals to act on each other, so if I hurt my neighbor, I'm just hurting myself, so it seems that it might have less moral implications than if I were to hurt another individual. Also, personhood. So I am very proud of being my own person and other people being their own people. And with monism, if you're just a modification, then you really aren't special. And while you might persist on as something else when your modification, or the modification that is you, wears out, so if I smooth out my rug, the rug's still there. So there are two ways of looking at nihilism. One being that there are no things at all, and they are just attributes. This is very compatible with idealism, so I'll be talking about that later when I talk about idealism. But there's another way of looking at nihilism, which is to say that all things are actually just mere collections, a stuff, a mere modification, a universal, or an event. Now, this seems to have problems because if you take any one of those and talk about it just by itself, you can't explain everything as a mere modification because something has to be modified. So obviously that one thing would that would be leaning more towards monism. Everything can't be a stuff because there's obviously a big difference between this chair and me, and it really doesn't make sense to talk about things as a universal or an event either. The second topic I'm going to be discussing is eternalism, the theory of temporality. So eternalism holds that all of time exists, both past, present, and future already exists. There is no progression of time. It's just a experience of time. So this would very much be in line with B series more than A series. One of the main reasons I like eternalism is it seems that everything that is temporal has to have a cause. And we hold that there, or I hold that there is a necessary being that is God, and necessary means that it can't be caused by something else. So it seems to me that God must exist outside of time, that time is a creation of God. And if time is a creation of God, then it doesn't really make sense to think of time as anything but an object, because it can't be changing. You can't have a process of change without time. So even if you were to say, well, the time we experience is within another layer of time, that time still has to be created by God as well. So in the end, it seems that all time has to exist at once. There is a downside of holding this that many people feel like it reduces free will, because everything is determined, it's set. But I would argue that since the future has no causal effect on the present, it's not really determined, it's just set. So it could be that all of my decisions happen in an instant and I experience it, but I still make those decisions and then experience them over a period of time. So when I'm making those decisions, I'm still acting with free will. And so for me, there is a sort of, it's a little iffy that the future is set, but it isn't determined by anything other than my free will, and obviously everyone else's free will and causal events. The third topic I'm going to be talking about is Berkeley's idealism, which, while it is a type of realism, isn't, or a realism as the book defines it with a capital R, but it isn't with a lowercase r. So Berkeley holds that there is sort of an external world to the mind in that everything is a mental impression. It's just that there isn't a physical external world. So all of these impressions are passed down by God to all individual minds. So this allows for objective truth, which therefore qualifies it as realism with a capital R. But because there is no physical external world, it isn't realism with a lowercase r. So I don't feel like there is any way to disprove this theory, but there are some implications that come with it that make me doubt it or not want to accept it, and rather accept a more physical external world. So if all experiences are just impressions, it seems that there are some impressions that always occur together. The book talks about how there is tactile roundness and visual roundness, and these always occur at the same time. So it seems to me that there must be some object that holds both of those properties, and the physicality of that object makes it so that those two properties are, in fact, shared. If you hold that they're just properties and they aren't held by a physical object, then you need another property that holds those two properties together, and you can have a infinite regress problem with that, where there's tons of properties that all need to be happening together, and that just doesn't seem to make sense. Also, on a moral standpoint, I feel that humanity is ideally embodied, so we aren't just a mind, but my body is a essential part of me, and it is a good part of me. So if you hold that everything is just an impression and that there is no physical world, you have to throw that out, and that just doesn't feel right to me. My favorite story this semester was The Tower of Babel. I really enjoyed the cosmology of the story. So at first, many people are familiar with the story of the Tower of Babel, but this story takes a different view on that. And as the story goes on, you see that their world is not like ours. First of all, they go up to the stars and can go past the sun. So there's a very different outlook on the world in the story, but it isn't just explained away like, oh, at the beginning of the story, it tells you, yeah, this is how the world looks. You kind of discover it as the story goes on. And I think that makes the story very intriguing. The story also seems to be very significant to me because it points out why metaphysics is important. So metaphysics is the idea of asking more of why things happen than how they happen. And by that I mean asking, why is the world set up in a way that there is rain, rather than asking, how does it rain? Even though people might ask, why does it rain, and mean, how is it that rain happens? So someone might try to answer the question, why does it rain, by saying, oh, well, the precipitation in the clouds condenses and therefore it falls, and then they might go on to explain the water cycle. But that doesn't explain why the world is even set up in a way that rain would happen in the first place. And to me, it seems that there is no way of getting to that question through normal science or physics. You can ask how things occur, but an underlying why and a purpose, you can't really get that. And the same is in this story. They get to the top of the tower and they burrow through into heaven, and it turns out that heaven is just leading them back to the bottom of the earth. And then the big question happens, well, then where is God? And it seems to me that that is a very metaphysical question, because God doesn't seem to be in a place in this story, but it's very obvious that he still exists.